just the other side of that same coin, so I won't go there in any detail. Looking at the budget as a whole, as recommended to you on November 16, recall it's a $53 million budget, of which 15.5 roughly is the general fund and 37.5 are the other funds. We've started taking a number of actions to try to be financially prudent, including taking the 5-year outlook in looking at budgeting. We've made significant reductions in the 2009 general fund budget and staffing levels, and identified additional reductions necessary in 2010 through 2014. We already talked about the $1.9 million gap by 2014 that we need to close. And we've talked about this graph. One of the things that Jack was talking about here is, if you go back, for example, to 2002, the goldenrod color is what property taxes were then. If you reduce them by the CPI, to show their buying power today, you can see how it's losing ground. The purple is what new construction did in that same time period, and it sort of backfilled what we were losing, but at the same time you can see the population was growing, and so in fact we lost ground with, even in this substantially robust economy of 2002 to 2008, when construction was really going gangbusters here in the county. We still lost ground against what our service demands were. And recall that revenues have fallen off significantly, both general sales tax and real estate excise tax. We've already made substantial cuts, and they've been painful. In 2008, community development cut staff by 8, and hours for remaining staff by 10%, and implemented a 4-day work week. In August of this year, they needed to lay off 3 additional staff and have an additional infusion or transfer from the general fund of $125,000 to even continue the reduced staffing levels. In April of this year, you amended our 2009 budget and by about $1 million, and all staff hours were cut for this year by 6.25%, and other budget adjustments were announced at that time. As part of implementing that, in September of this year, County Parks announced plans to close 4 parks and cut maintenance to 6 parks in 2009, and cut maintenance to 6 more parks in 2010. In September and October, Public Health Department closed environmental health on Fridays and cut back the public health nurse support to mothers with newborns, and also cut family planning clinics by 1 day per week. And in October, the Cooperative Extension reduced staffing levels and also closed on Fridays. So even before we go into 2010, the point I'm making is we've been making substantial cuts.
And we used to provide the support for all newborns in the county when they had insurance and other options.
And so this is part of the context for why these revenue recommendations are coming to you. Is we've already gone through a little over a year of substantial cutbacks, and looking ahead, we're looking at continued cuts. So for example, this next year, even with taking the 1% limit factor plus the levy shift from the road fund, the general fund revenues are projected to be lower in 2010 than 2009 if you exclude some extraordinary revenues from a new tribal law enforcement contract that the sheriff has and a stimulus drug enforcement grant that the prosecutor and the sheriff share. So both revenues and expenditures in 2010, as recommended to you, would be lower next year if not for those grants and contract, notwithstanding this assistance of the 1% and the levy shift that we're recommending. And in looking at next year, building on Jack's comments about the impact on your department, all departments that are funded or receiving transfers from the general fund reduce their budgets by 4.7%, and then saving about $575,000. And then directors and electeds also found cross-departmental efficiencies and reductions for another $500,000. So together these total over $1 million. The cuts have been painful, and services in each department to the public have been affected. Staffing levels, we're looking at 10 fewer employees in 2010 than originally budgeted in 2009. And compared to 2008, the county will have dropped 23 FTEs. In fact, the proposed staffing levels for 2010 are lower than any year since 2002. If you were not to use the road bank capacity and combine it with a temporary levy shift, the general fund in 2010 would need to absorb $216,000 of additional service cuts this next year. And that's not something that I can recommend to you, looking at the needs of the public for our services. And even with this $216,000 shift in 2010 and 11, were you to take that again next year, by 2012, Jefferson County still will need to make over $700,000 in additional cuts to services. We can project that based on the rate of growth between revenues and expenditures, that structural issue. We can foresee that unless either the state legislature or citizens act either next year or the year after to provide additional revenue. So even with the revenue options that we're recommendations that we're placing before you today, we're foreseeing that we would need to cut even more deeply by 2012 unless additional revenues are provided by the state legislature or our citizens.